Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight we're sinking into the calm gray mist of London's past. So grab a blanket, get comfy, dim the lights, and let's spend the next couple of hours with one of the city's most brooding landmarks. Yes, the Tower of London. That squat, gloomy fortress sitting politely by the Thames, pretending not to be haunted. Spoiler, it probably is. Now, the tower is famous today as a tourist attraction. You can buy snow globes, wave at men in silly uniforms, and gawk at the crown jewels while pretending you understand the difference between a scepter and a rod. But originally, the tower wasn't built for tourists. It was built for intimidation, which is kind of the same thing but with less ice cream and more medieval executions. So let's rewind, all the way back to the 11th century, specifically 1066. A year every school child in Britain knows, mostly because teachers repeat it until it's branded on your soul. William the Conqueror had just beaten Harold Godwinson at the Battle of Hastings. Poor Harold. Shot in the eye with an arrow. Or not. Historians argue about it. But either way, Harold was very dead and William was very smug. William marches into London and, surprise, Londoners aren't exactly thrilled. Imagine being an Anglo-Saxon citizen. You've got a French-speaking duke who suddenly declares himself king, and now his pals are strutting around acting superior because they know how to order wine in Paris. Londoners weren't buying it. They were sullen, angry, and occasionally violent. And William, who was many things but never naive, knew he had to keep this city under control. So, his solution? Build a massive, looming fortress right in the heart of it. A giant stone, "Don't mess with me," plonked beside the river. It was the medieval version of installing CCTV cameras, except with more beheadings. Thus, the Tower of London was born. Well, the idea of it. Construction began in the late 1060s, and the main feature was the White Tower. And when I say white, I don't mean bright and shiny. I mean, it was made out of pale stone imported from Caen in Normandy. Yes, William didn't trust the local English rock. He literally shipped over French stone to make sure everyone got the point. This is my land now, and it's built out of my stuff. Naturally, this didn't win hearts. The Anglo-Saxon chroniclers at the time grumbled endlessly about the tower. One monk wrote that it was a cause of great suffering to the people, which is medieval monk speak for, we hate this thing, it blocks the skyline, and also everyone is terrified. And to be fair, it was terrifying. Picture it, a massive stone keep looming 90 feet high with walls 15 feet thick, surrounded by palisades, ditches, and later defensive walls. For ordinary Londoners, it must have looked like an alien spaceship had landed in the middle of town, except the alien spoke Norman French and taxed you to death. Now, William himself didn't live long enough to enjoy his new shiny fortress. He died in 1087, after falling off a horse, which sounds mildly funny until you realize he was extremely overweight at the time, and his funeral turned into a slapstick disaster. They tried to stuff his swollen body into a too-small coffin, and it literally exploded. Church incense was waved frantically. Everyone gagged. Medieval funerals, never glamorous. But his tower endured. It would go on to become one of the most infamous buildings in England. A palace, a prison, a zoo, an armory, and yes, the unfortunate final stop for many royals who lost the medieval version of Game of Thrones. Spoiler, losing meant your head came off. Before we get to all those juicy stories of imprisonment and execution, though, we need to stick with the early years. Because the tower didn't just pop into existence overnight. It grew, like a medieval Lego set, constantly expanded and tinkered with by successive kings. Take William's son, William Rufus, creatively nicknamed Rufus because of his red hair. He expanded the defenses, but his reign was mostly remembered for dying in a suspicious hunting accident. Apparently someone accidentally shot him with an arrow. Medieval hunting trips were surprisingly dangerous, especially if you were disliked by your nobles, which Rufus was. Then came Henry I, who was William's younger son. He continued the work on the tower, but he's best remembered for having way too many illegitimate children. Seriously, he fathered something like 20 or 25 kids outside of marriage. Medieval kings didn't exactly understand birth control, but they did understand mistresses.
By the time the Plantagenets rolled around in the 12th and 13th centuries, the tower had evolved into a fully fortified complex. Kings like Richard the Lionheart and Henry III added more walls, moats, and towers. Henry III in particular was obsessed with making the place look royal, not just scary. He whitewashed the tower, literally painted it white, so it gleamed against the London sky. He also decorated the royal apartments, turning it into an actual palace. Which is funny because nobody remembers the tower as a palace. We remember it as the place where people waited to die. And speaking of Henry III, he also turned the tower into one of the earliest royal menageries. Yes, a zoo. Because nothing says absolute monarchy like keeping lions and leopards in cages just to show off. At one point, they even had a polar bear. It was a gift from Norway, and the poor thing was chained up by the Thames, allowed to go fishing with a leash. Imagine rowing past and seeing a polar bear paddling happily in the river. London has always been weird. But, of course, the tower wasn't just about animals and fancy apartments. Its main reputation was fear. It was where important prisoners were dragged, locked up, and sometimes very politely executed. We'll get to those stories soon, and trust me, there are many. But here in the early years, the tower was mostly about power projection. The Normans were new, shaky rulers, and they needed everyone to know who was boss. The tower made that point better than any speech or sermon. So as we drift along through history, let's keep this image in mind. Londoners grumbling, monks scowling, and above it all, this whitewashed fortress squatting by the river, a constant reminder that William had conquered and he wasn't planning to give anything back.
So we left off with the White Tower looming proudly beside the Thames, Londoners glaring at it like a sore thumb, and Norman kings happily tinkering with walls, moats, and apartments. By the 13th century, the Tower of London wasn't just a fortress anymore. It had become this strange hybrid, part military stronghold, part royal palace, part glorified zoo. Basically the medieval equivalent of a mall, everything crammed into one place, though with fewer Starbucks and significantly more lions. Let's start with King John, everyone's favorite villain from Robin Hood. You know, the sulky brother of Richard the Lionheart. John wasn't the best at, well, anything. He lost Normandy. He lost most of his wars. He managed to annoy every noble in England at once, which takes talent. And eventually, he was forced to sign Magna Carta in 1215, the medieval equivalent of a group project contract, drawn up because nobody trusted him to do his job properly. Naturally, John used the tower as his little insurance policy. When barons rose against him, he stashed valuables and hostages in the tower like a paranoid hoarder. And honestly, he wasn't wrong to be paranoid, because spoiler, his reign fell apart anyway. He died miserably, probably from dysentery, which is about as unglamorous an ending as you can get. Moving on to Henry III, John's son, who had a much longer reign and a bit of an obsession with renovations. Henry adored the tower. He painted the interiors, built a new curtain wall, and tried very hard to make the place look like an actual palace instead of just a stone anxiety attack. He's the guy who added the royal chapel inside the White Tower, because what's better than praying with 15-foot-thick walls closing in around you? But here's the fun part. Henry's reign wasn't exactly peaceful. He was deeply unpopular with his nobles. In fact, the tower repeatedly had to serve as a royal panic room whenever London got too rebellious. At one point, Henry fled to the tower for safety, sulking while mobs outside shouted their displeasure. Imagine trying to redecorate your apartments while thousands of angry Londoners chant outside the walls. Very soothing. Then we get to Edward I, Longshanks, the guy portrayed in Braveheart as a ruthless, angry stick of a man. Edward used the tower more practically. He fortified it, added another moat, and shoved in new buildings. He wasn't interested in making it glamorous. He wanted it terrifying. He also used it as a prison for high-value captives, because the tower by this point had basically become the medieval version of maximum security jail. Now, let's pause on this word, prison, because when we say prisoners in the tower, people often imagine filthy dungeons, rats chewing on toes, and desperate men scratching tally marks into the walls, which sort of happens sometimes. But most tower prisoners were elite.
Nobles, bishops, foreign kings, these weren't random pickpockets from Cheapside. They were political hostages, treated according to rank, which means some of them actually lived in pretty comfortable conditions. Not spa level, but not sewer level either. More like being grounded in a luxury hotel, but without the minibar. One of the first famous prisoners? Ranulph Flambard, Bishop of Durham. He was locked up by Henry I in 1100, accused of corruption, which was like accusing water of being wet. Bishops and corruption went together like bread and ale. Anyway, Ranulph made history as the first person to escape the tower. His method? He threw a party, literally. He smuggled in a rope hidden inside a barrel of wine, got the guards drunk, and then shimmied down the wall into freedom. Smooth move, Ranulph. He didn't just escape, he set the gold standard for medieval jailbreaks. Over the next couple centuries, more and more unlucky nobles found themselves checked into Hotel Tower. Foreign princes, rebellious barons, Scottish captives. Even a king of Scotland, John Balliol, had to spend some quality time there, brooding about his poor life choices. By the 13th century, the Tower was fully locked into its role as both palace and prison. Edward III held lavish banquets in the royal apartments, while prisoners languished just a few corridors away. Talk about awkward dinner parties. Imagine feasting on roast swan while hearing some poor nobleman clanking chains in the basement. Very soothing. Then came Richard II. Oh, Richard, the boy king who grew into the man-child king. He loved fashion, pageantry, and making terrible political decisions. During the Peasants' Revolt in 1381, thousands of rebels stormed London. Richard, who was only 14, actually went out to meet them and somehow survived. The rebels swarmed the tower, dragged out officials, and executed them on the spot. One unlucky archbishop, Simon Sudbury, was literally decapitated on Tower Hill, while Richard probably wondered if this counted as character development. The tower had been breached, which shattered its aura of invincibility. But Richard, being Richard, ignored the warning signs. He went on to alienate everyone, got deposed by Henry IV, and ended up imprisoned himself. Not in the tower, ironically, but the building's reputation as a royal holding cell was now firmly cemented. Speaking of Henry IV, let's glide into the Lancasters and Yorkists, because the 15th century was basically the Tower's golden age of royal dysfunction, the Wars of the Roses. Nothing says bedtime history like endless cousins fighting over crowns. Here's the short version. The houses of Lancaster and York, both descended from Edward III, couldn't stop squabbling. The Tower became the ultimate waiting room of doom. If you were taken prisoner in these wars, the Tower was where you ended up. Sometimes alive, sometimes less alive. One of the saddest tales? The princes in the Tower. Edward V and his little brother, Richard of Shrewsbury. In 1483, their uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, had them lodged in the Tower for their protection. And by protection, I mean suspiciously disappeared. Nobody knows exactly what happened. Did Richard III have them murdered? Did someone else do it? Were they secretly smuggled out? Historians still debate. But what we do know is two little boys went into the Tower. They never came out. Not exactly the kind of bedtime story you tell kids, unless you're a Plantagenet. And right there, that blend of royal drama, imprisonment, and unsolved mystery is why the Tower's reputation as a grim, cursed place took root. By the end of the medieval era, it was no longer just a fortress. It was a symbol, a place where power was displayed, but also where power ended. So, as the medieval era drifts into the Tudor age, the Tower story shifts again. Because if you thought the Plantagenets were dysfunctional, wait until we get to Henry VIII. The man practically turned Tower imprisonment into a family tradition. But let's not rush. Let's keep our pace slow and steady. For now, just picture the Tower in the 15th century. Walls gleaming white, flags fluttering, nobles whispering nervously in the halls, and children vanishing into legend.
All right, let's settle in. The medieval Plantagenets have faded into history, the Wars of the Roses are mostly behind us, and here comes the Tudor dynasty. Enter Henry VII, the man who finally ended the endless cousin wars, and honestly could have relaxed a bit, except he didn't. Henry was obsessed with control, surveillance, and paperwork, which is probably why the Tower was soon brimming with royal secrets, imprisoned nobles, and the occasional unfortunate clergyman. Henry VII didn't have the charisma of a Richard III or the flair of a Henry VIII. He was cautious, calculating, and, for lack of a better term, a little neurotic. He liked the Tower as a royal stronghold, both for himself and for holding anyone who might dream of challenging his throne. And yes, that included his own relatives on occasion. Family gatherings must have been tense. Imagine Christmas dinner with a moat and a drawbridge, just in case Uncle Edmund gets ideas about succession. Then comes Henry VIII, arguably the man who really made the Tower famous, not for architecture or even clever defense, but for making it a stage for his personal brand of domestic terror. Henry VIII is best known today for his 6 wives, but let's be honest, he's equally remembered for turning the Tower into a waiting room for those who got in his way. Anne Boleyn, the one with the famous neck, quite literally, is probably the Tower's most famous resident. Arrested on charges of treason, adultery, and general being a nuisance to the king, she was lodged in the Queen's house within the Tower walls. She spent her last days pacing the halls, writing letters, and probably reconsidering her life choices. Henry had her executed on Tower Green, a relatively private spot inside the Tower, which, while better than public spectacle, still sent a very clear message. Marriage to the king could be hazardous to your health. Before Anne, there was Catherine Howard, another young queen, also accused of adultery, also executed, and yes, also held in the Tower. Henry was really establishing a pattern here. Tower residents in the Tudor era needed to have excellent manners, impeccable alibis, and preferably no close connections to the king. But the Tower wasn't all executions. It was also a luxurious, if slightly gloomy place for nobility to wait their turn. Lady Jane Grey, the so-called 9 Days Queen, was imprisoned in the Tower after a brief, ill-fated reign. She lived there in relative comfort, though one can imagine it felt more like a gilded cage than a palace. Eventually, her life ended tragically, but for a while, the Tower allowed her to dream of power, even if that dream was short-lived. The Tower also had a slightly darker domestic function. It was where the king kept his treasures, including arms, armor, and, of course, the crown jewels. These weren't just decorative items, they were potent symbols of royal authority. A king with shiny jewels was a king who could also justify throwing you in the moat if you annoyed him. Speaking of symbols, the ravens of the Tower make their first consistent appearance in Tudor times. Legend says that if the ravens leave, the kingdom will fall. Historians debate when this superstition truly began, but the birds have been living in the Tower for centuries, mostly ignored, unless someone panicked about national security because a raven wandered into the wrong corridor. Raven management, a surprisingly serious Tudor concern. Now, back to Henry VIII. Beyond the Queens, he also imprisoned Thomas More, the former Lord Chancellor. More had the audacity to refuse acknowledging Henry as the supreme head of the Church of England. For this, he was arrested, held in the Tower, and eventually executed. His crime? Maintaining personal conscience in the face of royal overreach, which, in Tudor England, was like bringing a water pistol to a cannon fight. And let's not forget Guy Fawkes' distant Tudor predecessors, conspirators and traitors who used the Tower as a pit stop before their inevitable, often unpleasant, fates. It became the go-to location for anyone accused of plotting against the crown, or simply anyone who looked at the king the wrong way. During Elizabeth I's youth, the Tower continued to be the backdrop for intrigue and paranoia. Elizabeth herself was imprisoned there by her sister Mary, accused of participating in plots. The young princess spent months inside the Tower's walls, pacing, reading, and probably composing early versions of her cautious political strategy. She survived, of course, eventually ascending the throne herself, likely making a mental note: never trust family, especially if they like red dresses and public executions. By the end of the Tudor period, the tower had firmly cemented its dual identity: fortress and prison, royal residence and execution ground. Its walls had witnessed jealousy, ambition, paranoia, love gone wrong, and political maneuvering that could rival any modern soap opera. Yet despite all this grim history, the tower remained, standing resolutely beside the Thames, an unspoken reminder of the fragility of life and the enduring power of stone walls. And as we drift gently into the next period, the Stuart era, the tower's role continues, slightly less about royal executions and more about civil unrest, religious persecution, and occasionally high-profile political prisoners. But for now, let's pause, take a deep breath, and imagine the tower in the 16th century, whitewashed, intimidating, and echoing with the footsteps of those who knew that one wrong word could land you in the royal cells.
Welcome back, friends. As we drift gently through history, let's leave the Tudors behind and float into the Stuart period, a time when the Tower of London became less about royal matrimony and more about politics, paranoia, and occasionally imprisonment for the curious crime of being on the wrong side of history. The Stuarts arrived with James I in 1603, uniting the crowns of Scotland and England. James was fond of ceremony, robes, and pomp, essentially a king who liked glitter and paperwork in equal measure. Naturally, he continued using the tower as a royal stronghold and storage facility, but also for its original purpose, controlling the unruly nobles of London. The tower was still very much the place where people ended up if they displeased the crown, though now the complaints were less about romantic entanglements and more about religious disagreements or political plots. One early example, Robert Catesby and the infamous Gunpowder Plot of 1605. Yes, the Remember, Remember bunch wanted to blow up Parliament. They were arrested, interrogated, and tortured in the tower before their execution. Torture at the tower was, by now, fairly routine, though usually reserved for high-profile cases. The rack was a favorite tool, not especially glamorous, but effective enough to make conspirators reconsider their life choices. Meanwhile, the tower was still housing nobles and royals who had found themselves on the wrong side of James I. But unlike the Tudors, the Stuarts were generally less interested in executing everyone with bad manners. It became more a place of political limbo, of careful waiting, plotting, and in some cases, quiet suffering. Then came Charles I, whose reign would end in a way almost every historian sighs over: civil war. The English Civil War, 1642 to 1651, turned London upside down. Suddenly, the tower was not just a royal residence or prison, but a strategic military asset. It stored weapons, gunpowder, and loyalist troops. The city's inhabitants, who had once feared the tower as an abstract symbol of authority, now saw it as a literal center of danger and power. Charles himself wasn't exactly the most hands-on king. He preferred long robes, sermons, and prayer, leaving military decisions to generals who, frankly, often disagreed violently with each other. Eventually, the tower housed his enemies, his allies, and anyone suspected of sympathizing with the wrong faction. During the Civil War, many notable prisoners passed through the tower. Some were executed, though often the real deaths happened elsewhere. The tower became more of a psychological cage, a place to remind people that rebellion, even polite rebellion, came with consequences. By the time Charles I was executed in 1649, outside, on a scaffold, because the tower wasn't exactly public event friendly, the tower had survived its first outright threat to the monarchy. The monarchy itself would return under Charles II, but the tower's reputation had shifted. It was no longer just a palace or symbolic fortress. It was a place where political legitimacy and physical power intersected, sometimes unpleasantly.
During the late 17th century, the tower also housed notable figures accused of espionage, treason, or just having bad luck with whom they were related to. For instance, during the reign of James II, Titus Oates, a man famous for inventing the Popish Plot, a supposed Catholic conspiracy, spent time in the tower, mostly to protect him from enraged crowds and angry Catholics who realized he was lying. The tower was proving versatile, part palace, part prison, part bizarre sanctuary for liars and schemers. And let's not forget Guy Fawkes, or more precisely, his fellow conspirators. While Fawkes himself was executed elsewhere, the tower's cells held many of the plotters before their demise. These rooms, previously used by princesses, queens, and noblemen, now echoed with the whispers of men plotting explosions, oaths, and confessions. The tower was adapting to the times, still imposing, still frightening, but less about execution by decapitation and more about political theater. Through the late Stuart period, the tower continued its dual existence. Royals occasionally visited, prisoners sometimes dined on decent food, and officials administered justice that could seem fair, arbitrary, or both, depending on one's luck, rank, or ability to curry favor with the king. It was a place of power, control, and the subtle, constant reminder that London itself bowed to the authority residing behind those massive walls. By the 18th century, the tower's military importance had waned. London had expanded, artillery had improved, and the idea of a medieval fortress controlling the city was becoming quaint. But its symbolic power remained strong. It still housed prisoners, often debtors, political dissidents, or unfortunate foreigners, and the crown jewels remained under its watchful eyes. It had become a monument to centuries of authority, a quiet witness to the follies, ambitions, and the tragedies of England's elite. So, as we drift into the next chapter, the modern period, let's imagine the tower through these centuries, whitewashed, imposing, occasionally terrifying, occasionally decorative, always looming. A fortress, a palace, a prison, and ultimately a symbol of history itself.
As we drift gently from the Stuarts into the 18th century, the Tower of London began to experience subtle, almost imperceptible changes. The age of cannon and muskets had rendered many medieval fortresses less strategically vital, and the tower was no exception. It remained formidable, certainly, but its role as the city's ultimate stronghold was slowly being replaced by the broader, expanding power of the British state. By the early 1700s, London had grown considerably beyond the tower's walls. The city sprawled outward, streets and alleys multiplying like vines across the Thames. For many Londoners, the tower was no longer a looming, threatening edifice in daily life. It had become more of a landmark, a reminder of centuries past, rather than a living, breathing instrument of coercion. Still, it retained its presence. The tower continued to house prisoners, though the types of inmates changed. Political prisoners, foreign nationals, and occasional criminals of note were still kept behind its walls, but the execution grounds, Tower Hill, saw fewer high-profile deaths. The tower's historical role as a decapitating authority remained in memory more than practice, though the occasional executions still reminded the populace of the crown's lingering power. One notable prisoner during this period was John Bernardi, an Italian who allegedly plotted against King George I in 1715. His imprisonment in the tower was symbolic, a reminder that the monarchy, though now more constitutional, could still flex authority when challenged. Bernardi spent months confined, much of it in relative comfort compared to the horrors of medieval incarceration. His cells, by this point, were less about torture and more about containment, quiet, solemn, and slightly gloomy. The tower also evolved in terms of its personnel. The yeoman warders, more familiarly known as beefeaters, became increasingly ceremonial during this period. Their responsibilities expanded to include guarding the crown jewels, guiding visitors, and maintaining the historical aura of the tower.
Though the role still carried authority, by the 18th century it was largely symbolic, a bridge between living history and spectacle. By the mid-1700s, Londoners began to perceive the tower as a historical relic rather than a functional fortress. Artists sketched it, poets wrote about it, and its image became a staple in cultural memory. Samuel Johnson himself, the famed lexicographer, mentioned the tower in passing in his letters, remarking upon its solemnity and enduring presence beside the Thames. For the city's elite, it was a place of ceremony, for scholars, a place of reflection, and for tourists, a curiosity worth photographing. In 1747, the tower held the unfortunate Charles Edward Stuart, yes, Bonnie Prince Charlie, briefly during the Jacobite uprisings. The young pretender was under house arrest, largely in comfortable quarters, though the walls undoubtedly reminded him that his claim to the throne was not currently favored in England. His stay exemplified the tower's evolving function. Imprisonment was now as much about psychological pressure and symbolic containment as actual punishment. The tower also began serving a growing military administrative role. Armories were expanded, and it became increasingly a storehouse for weapons, including cannons, muskets, and later rifles. Its garrison continued to operate, albeit more as a ceremonial presence than a defensive necessity. The moat, once a critical defensive feature, was maintained but largely decorative, a visual reminder of the tower's martial heritage. In literature, the tower began to take on almost mythic qualities. Gothic novels of the period frequently referenced it as a site of intrigue, haunted passages, or grim historical mystery. By now it had firmly entered the public imagination, not as a place where the king might strike you down tomorrow, but as a repository of centuries of human ambition, folly, and misfortune. By the late 18th century, the tower's prisoners were more often political figures or those caught in international disputes. For instance, during the Napoleonic Wars, French prisoners of war were occasionally housed within its walls. While conditions were regulated, the presence of foreign prisoners lent an international dimension to the tower's history. It was no longer just an English monument, but a symbol of British power, and, occasionally, restraint. During this period, the crown jewels gained increasing prominence as a tourist attraction. Though the tower was not yet fully open to the public, visits were permitted under supervision. The yeoman warders began to act as guides of sorts, explaining the history, pointing out features like the Bloody Tower, and recounting tales of notorious prisoners. This small-scale tourism set the stage for the massive public interest that would come in the Victorian era. By the early 19th century, the tower's military role had almost entirely declined. Its fortifications were obsolete, its moat decorative, and its armories were more storage than strategic assets. However, the symbolic importance of the tower remained immense. Monarchs used it to showcase continuity and tradition, public executions had moved largely to other locations, and the tower itself was increasingly a repository for ceremonial artifacts, including the regalia used in coronations and state ceremonies. The Victorian period saw the tower's transformation into a tourist and historical site accelerate. Queen Victoria herself encouraged preservation and restoration efforts. Gothic revival influences led to careful renovations that emphasized the tower's historical architecture rather than its original martial utility. The White Tower in particular was stabilized, its Norman stonework celebrated as a link to the nation's medieval past. During this time, the public became fascinated with the darker elements of the tower's history. Guides highlighted the Bloody Tower, the tales of the princes in the tower, Anne Boleyn's execution, and other infamous episodes. The tower became a site where history and legend intertwined, carefully curated for public consumption. Its identity shifted from fortress and prison to museum and historical symbol. Even ceremonial functions continued. The yeoman warders maintained their duties, and the ravens were carefully protected, ensuring that the legend of their significance endured. By the mid-19th century, the tower had fully established its dual identity, a preserved historical site and a locus of national memory. Its grim past was now presented as cultural heritage rather than living fear.
All right, friends, take a deep breath. We floated gently from the Tudors, through the Stuarts, and wandered with the tower into Victorian splendor. Now, the 20th century arrives, and the Tower of London finds itself in a world that is somehow more dangerous, more bureaucratic, and yet paradoxically less in need of thick stone walls. By the early 1900s, the tower was no longer a fortress in the medieval sense. The guns lining the walls were obsolete, the moat had become more ornamental than defensive, and London itself had sprawled far beyond the tower's reach. Yet the tower retained symbolic power. It was the architectural embodiment of authority, continuity, and, if you squinted, a slightly terrifying reminder that kings and queens could still make your life miserable. During World War I, the tower briefly returned to one of its older functions: prison. Not for rebellious barons or misbehaving queens this time, but for spies. The Germans, naturally, had agents operating in London, and the tower became a secure place to detain them. Cells once occupied by medieval nobles now hosted men and women who spoke foreign languages, wore slightly less comfortable clothing, and had been caught plotting sabotage or delivering sensitive information. Their presence was both mundane.
All right, friends, we've wandered through centuries of political intrigue, imprisonment, and royal drama. Now, let's take a deep breath and enter a quieter, eerier aspect of the tower: its ghosts, myths, and stories that have drifted through centuries, carried by whispers, legends, and the occasional tourist guidebook. The tower has always had a knack for inspiring stories, some based on fact, many on speculation, and some on pure imagination. Perhaps this is unsurprising, considering the centuries of intense human emotion, ambition, and occasional despair that have echoed within its walls. People like dramatic stories. The tower provides them in spades. Let's begin with the most famous, Anne Boleyn. Arrested, imprisoned, and eventually executed on Tower Green in 1536, Anne's ghost is said to roam the corridors, often described as carrying her own head under her arm. Tour guides love this story, whispering to visitors about her pale figure gliding silently through the Queen's house, or along the path near the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, where she rests today. Scholars debate the sightings, of course, but the legend endures. There is a quiet, almost hypnotic consistency to reports. Chill in the air, a fleeting vision, a sense of sorrow. Next, the princes in the tower, Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury. These two young boys disappeared in 1483, their fate a mystery that still haunts historians and tourists alike. Some claim that on quiet nights, the tower whispers of lost childhoods, tiny footsteps in the bloody tower, and muffled cries of the unremembered. It's the kind of story that blends history with imagination, a palace, a prison, and a mystery all rolled into one. Even today, guides will point to the bloody tower and pause dramatically, letting silence do the storytelling. Then there's Lady Jane Grey, the 9 Days Queen. Though she died young, she is said to haunt certain passages, her presence described as quiet, melancholy, and almost imperceptible. The faint scent of lavender, the soft rustle of skirts, a fleeting glimpse at the end of a corridor. Her ghostly presence serves as a reminder of political ambition and the cruel caprices of dynastic struggle. The tower is full of other lesser-known specters as well. Some claim to see Thomas Becket's spirit wandering near the chapel. Others mention prisoners from the Civil War caught in eternal pacing, or anonymous nobles, their names forgotten but their sorrow lingering in the walls. Even guards report odd occurrences, doors that swing open by themselves, the sensation of being watched, faint echoes of distant conversations when the tower is otherwise silent. Of course, not all legends are about ghosts. The ravens of the tower carry their own myths. Tradition says that if the ravens ever leave, the kingdom will fall. For centuries, this legend has been maintained through careful attention to these birds. They are fed, counted, and watched daily. Their wings clipped slightly to ensure they stay put. The ravens have become living symbols, part of a centuries-long narrative that merges superstition, care, and theatricality. People love them. They are both cute and slightly intimidating, perched atop towers, occasionally swooping over the Thames and keeping watch over history in their silent, feathered way. Folklore also surrounds the Bloody Tower and the White Tower, emphasizing intrigue, imprisonment, and sometimes escape. Stories of prisoners slipping ropes out of windows, secret tunnels, and hidden passageways abound, blending fact and legend. For instance, the escape of Ranulph Flambard in the 11th century is often told with elaborate embellishments, and the tower's architecture seems almost designed to inspire stories. Narrow staircases, arrow slits, and imposing towers that seem to echo with centuries of footsteps. During wartime, the tower has accumulated additional mythic significance. In both world wars, when spies were imprisoned or executions threatened, the tower became a symbol of national security. Stories of secret tunnels, shadowy figures moving along the walls, and mysterious disappearances reinforced the tower's aura of mystery as its practical military significance diminished. In literature, the tower has long captured imagination. Gothic novels of the 18th and 19th centuries frequently referenced it as a site of terror, intrigue, and haunted corridors. Poets, playwrights, and authors often used the tower as a symbol of authority, imprisonment, and suspense. Its presence in culture has only grown with time, appearing in films, television shows, and historical fiction, where it continues to represent both power and vulnerability. Even today, visitors to the tower feel the weight of history and myth. Walking through the corridors, standing in the courtyards, or peering into cells, one cannot help but imagine the lives that unfolded here. Queens pacing nervously, princes lost to political ambition, spies silently plotting, and guards performing their duties under centuries of scrutiny. The tower remains a living narrative, layered with human stories, legends, and the occasional chill of the supernatural. In essence, the tower's modern identity is inseparable from its myths. It is a site where fact and legend entwine, where visitors engage with the past through storytelling, imagination, and sensory experience. The ghosts, the ravens, the whispered tales, the architectural echoes, all contribute to the tower's continuing role as a symbol of British history, culture, and imagination. Walking through the tower today, one is reminded that history is never static. It is stories, memories, legends, and lived experiences, preserved in stone, timber, and feathered watchers on high. The tower endures as a testament to centuries of human drama, tragedy, ambition, and occasionally sheer stubbornness. And through it all, it remains, quietly, imposing, and endlessly fascinating. The perfect blend of fact and myth, history and legend.
Welcome back, friends. We've already glimpsed the tower's most famous ghosts, Anne Boleyn, the princes, Lady Jane Grey, and the ever-watchful ravens. Now let's drift further into the quieter, subtler tales that have accumulated over centuries. These stories are part history, part myth, and part imagination, exactly the kind of things that make the tower both soothingly dull and quietly thrilling at the same time. First, let's talk about escapes and near misses. The tower was never meant to be easy to escape. Thick walls, moats, and guarded gates were specifically designed to keep people in. And yet, a few clever individuals managed it. Take Ranulph Flambard, the Bishop of Durham in the 12th century. He is recorded as the first prisoner to successfully escape from the tower, using a rope smuggled in, lowering himself down the wall and disappearing into the night. Later accounts embellish the story. Secret accomplices, midnight shrouds, and silent guards. Whether entirely true or slightly dramatized, the story persists, feeding the imagination of generations. During the World Wars, the tower once again played a role in espionage and secret detentions. German spies held here reportedly wrote coded messages, attempted clever tricks, or simply waited quietly for trial or deportation. Their stories have been filtered through decades of rumor. Some say ghostly shadows linger in the same cells once occupied by medieval nobles, as if the tower itself remembers every act of intrigue that occurred within its walls. The psychological weight of history here is subtle, but pervasive. Then there are the unusual visitors and odd events that seem almost farcical in hindsight. For example, during the 18th century, certain prisoners were allowed relatively luxurious conditions, private rooms, servants, and sometimes even access to small gardens within the tower. Rumor has it that some spent time playing cards, composing music, or reading poetry, all while surrounded by walls that had witnessed centuries of intrigue. The contrast between historical dread and mundane human activity is part of the tower's subtle charm, a slow, reflective, almost soothing realization that history is full of mundane moments hiding within the grand narrative. Let's not forget the ghost stories that persist among guards. The yeoman warders, who have been part of the tower for centuries, often recount tales passed down from one generation to another. Some speak of a fleeting figure in a corridor, footsteps echoing when no one is there, or a sudden sense of unease near certain cells. These accounts are never loud or dramatic. They are gentle, quiet reminders of the tower's layered history. A little chill, a soft shadow, a story to tell at the end of a long day. In addition to ghosts, the tower has inspired numerous folklore legends. For example, stories of secret tunnels supposedly connecting the tower to distant parts of London or hidden chambers where prisoners might have attempted escapes capture the imagination. Most of these are probably exaggerated, yet they persist. They are the kind of slow-building, slightly unsettling tales perfect for relaxed contemplation, especially if you're lying in bed imagining centuries of human activity inside cold stone walls. Even the architecture contributes to the myths. Narrow staircases, arrow slits, hidden alcoves, and tall towers create an environment conducive to storytelling. The White Tower, the Bloody Tower, and the Beauchamp Tower all seem to whisper stories through their stone, providing the perfect backdrop for historical imagination. Every corner, every shadow, every draft is a potential story waiting to be told. And then there are the stories of persistence and ritual. The ceremony of the keys continues nightly, much as it has for centuries. The yeoman warders perform their duties with calm precision, locking gates, counting ravens, and keeping the ritual alive. These daily, almost mundane actions are themselves a kind of legend, a living connection to the tower's past, a ritual that stretches back hundreds of years, quietly ensuring that history is remembered, respected, and, in a very gentle way, hauntingly present. Finally, consider the cultural significance. The tower appears in literature, plays, and modern media. Gothic novels frequently reference it as a site of suspense and tragedy. Films and television shows dramatize its history, blending myth and fact. And yet, for those who visit, the tower's quiet, lingering presence is often more impactful than any dramatization. Standing in a corridor once walked by a medieval prisoner, feeling the weight of stone and centuries, one experiences the tower's stories directly, without the need for embellishment. So, as we drift to a close for Subpart 7b, the tower's legends are a mixture of fact, imagination, and careful curation. Ghosts linger, ravens watch, whispered stories persist, and architecture itself seems to carry memory. The tower is not merely a historical site, it is a living, breathing narrative. Its walls speak slowly, softly, and endlessly, inviting visitors to contemplate centuries of human life, ambition, failure, and occasionally, lingering mystery. Welcome back, friends. We've wandered through centuries of intrigue, imprisonment, ghosts, and legends. Now let's float gently into the tower's role in modern life, a place where history is both preserved and performed, where stone walls meet public fascination, and where rituals continue in quiet, mesmerizing repetition. By the 20th and 21st centuries, the Tower of London had largely ceased to function as a fortress or prison. Cannons, moats, and medieval defenses had lost much of their practical value. The last serious executions had occurred long ago, and the tower's role in politics had become symbolic. Yet its significance had not faded. If anything, it had shifted, transforming into a center of ceremony, education, and cultural memory. One of the tower's most enduring rituals is the ceremony of the keys, which has taken place every night for centuries. Guards known as yeoman warders, the iconic beefeaters, perform this ritual with calm precision. The gates are locked, the keys counted and checked, and a centuries-old sequence of movements is executed without deviation. Tourists are sometimes allowed to observe, standing quietly while history unfolds in a slow, deliberate rhythm. It is a practice that embodies continuity, a reminder that the tower remains alive, even if its role has changed. The yeoman warders themselves have evolved as well. Once practical guards and jailers, they are now historians, storytellers, and living symbols of the tower's past. Their ceremonial uniforms, dating back hundreds of years, are instantly recognizable, and their tours of the tower blend historical fact with gentle humor and anecdote. They ensure that the tower's stories of royal intrigue, imprisonment, and legend are communicated to visitors with calm authority and just a hint of snark. The crown jewels, perhaps the tower's most famous attraction, have also taken on central importance in modern times. They are no longer practical symbols of monarchical authority in the sense of enforcing obedience through awe or fear. Rather, they are displayed behind glass, under careful surveillance and interpreted for the public. Visitors can marvel at centuries of craftsmanship, from coronation crowns to ceremonial swords, while understanding their symbolic significance. The crown jewels serve as a bridge between history and contemporary culture, connecting visitors to centuries of monarchy while remaining safely out of reach. The tower's educational role has grown substantially. Schools, universities, and international visitors come to study its architecture, artifacts, and stories. Exhibitions are curated to convey historical context, prisoners' lives, royal politics, military history, and cultural myths. The tower has become a classroom of stone and timber, where lessons are learned not only through words, but through experience, imagination, and contemplation. Cultural events and commemorations continue to enhance the tower's modern relevance. Anniversaries of notable executions, historical anniversaries, and public ceremonies draw attention to the tower's role in national memory. Even in quiet times, the presence of ravens, the silent corridors, and the distant toll of bells maintain an atmosphere that is both serene and slightly eerie, perfectly suited for reflection, imagination, or a slow, relaxing journey through time. Even ceremonial duties that might seem trivial, like feeding the ravens or performing minor maintenance, carry symbolic weight. Each action connects the present to the past, preserving centuries of ritual and ensuring that history remains alive, not frozen. The tower functions as both monument and active participant in British culture, reminding us that history is not only recorded in books, but also enacted, maintained, and experienced. Walking through the tower today, one can imagine layers of history overlaying each other. Medieval kings and queens, prisoners pacing their cells, guards patrolling narrow corridors, craftsmen working in the White Tower, visitors from centuries past, all coexist.
silently, within the same walls. The tower's modern function is less about control or punishment, more about reflection, learning, and quiet awe. It allows us to witness the past while participating in the ongoing story of culture and memory. In this sense, the tower is a living museum, but it is also a place of imagination. Ghosts, legends, and myths are not dismissed, they are embraced as part of the narrative. The experience of walking its corridors, observing the rituals, or pausing by the raven's enclosures is enhanced by centuries of accumulated story, some factual, some legendary. It is this blending of reality and imagination that gives the tower its unique character and enduring fascination. So, as we close this part, picture the tower today. Ceremonial guards in crimson and gold, silent yet alert. Visitors quietly exploring courtyards and towers, the crown jewels sparkling under protective glass, ravens perched in their stately positions, and corridors that carry echoes of centuries past. It is a place of continuity, culture, and calm. A reminder that history can be slow, quiet, and deeply immersive. A perfect companion for those willing to observe and reflect. The Tower of London has traveled far from its origins as a Norman fortress. It has housed kings and queens, prisoners and spies, executed conspirators, inspired legends, and shaped cultural imagination. Today it stands as a monument, a museum, a classroom, a legend, and most of all, a silent witness to centuries of human experience. Its walls tell stories, sometimes whispered, sometimes boldly displayed, but always present, always patient, and always ready to invite the visitor into a slow, thoughtful journey through time.
Welcome back, friends. We've wandered through centuries of history, ghosts, legends, and modern ceremonies. Now, let's drift gently into the Tower of London's role as a symbol, not just for the city, but for Britain, and in some ways, the world. It is here that history becomes both tangible and performative, inviting visitors to experience centuries of human ambition, folly, and cultural memory. By the late 20th and early 21st centuries, the tower had fully embraced its identity as a cultural icon. No longer a fortress, prison, or armory, it had become a focal point for tourism, education, and national pride. Visitors arrive from all corners of the globe, eager to glimpse the crown jewels, wander through medieval corridors, and feel the weight of history under their feet. For many, the tower represents the essence of London: historic, imposing, and endlessly fascinating. Tourism is a major part of the tower's modern function. The site receives over 2 million visitors annually, each arriving with curiosity, cameras, and a desire to engage with history firsthand. Guided tours led by yeoman warders provide storytelling that blends fact and legend. Visitors are invited to consider the lives of prisoners, the ambitions of kings, and the mythology of the ravens, all within a calm, reflective environment. One of the tower's most effective tools for engaging the public is its layered presentation of history. The White Tower houses medieval armor and arms, giving a glimpse into the martial culture of the past. The Bloody Tower and Beauchamp Tower showcase sails and graffiti left by prisoners, hinting at lives once confined within these walls. The crown jewels, displayed under careful surveillance, connect visitors to monarchy, tradition, and craftsmanship across centuries. Each element is designed to immerse visitors slowly, without overwhelming them, encouraging reflection and imagination. Global significance comes naturally to a site like the Tower. It is a symbol of continuity, resilience, and the endurance of human institutions. From architecture to ritual, the Tower communicates a story about British identity, a narrative of monarchy, governance, cultural preservation, and national memory. International visitors often interpret it through their own lens, seeing in the Tower not only London's past, but also the universal human fascination with power, ambition, and mystery. Preservation efforts are central to maintaining this global symbol.
The tower is managed by historic royal palaces, which oversees conservation, restoration, and public engagement. Stonework, timber structures, and medieval features are carefully maintained, ensuring that visitors experience an authentic environment. Restoration is subtle and meticulous, designed to preserve history rather than impose modern aesthetics. In this way, the tower remains a bridge between past and present, a site where centuries coexist seamlessly. Even small details are considered part of the preservation effort. The ravens are monitored and cared for, ceremonial practices like the ceremony of the keys are maintained without interruption, and interpretive signage is updated carefully to reflect the latest historical research. Every element, from the stone steps to the display cases, contributes to the tower's role as both cultural landmark and living history museum. The tower's global appeal is further enhanced by its presence in media and literature. Films, television programs, novels, and documentaries frequently feature the tower as a setting or character, emphasizing its historical importance and iconic architecture. Its image is instantly recognizable. The White Tower rising above the Thames, ravens perched upon battlements, and the ceremonial uniforms of the yeoman warders. This media presence reinforces the tower's status as a symbol not only of London, but of Britain itself. Tourism and cultural significance are intertwined with education. The tower hosts programs for schools, universities, and public audiences, offering workshops, lectures, and interactive experiences. Visitors are encouraged to explore the nuances of medieval life, royal intrigue, prison conditions, and historical legends. Even subtle, slow-paced storytelling, ideal for reflective or sleepy narration, allows visitors to engage with history in a personal, immersive way. One of the tower's enduring qualities is its ability to balance spectacle and subtlety. The crown jewels may dazzle, and the yeoman warders may entertain with stories, but there is always a quiet, reflective layer beneath the surface. The corridors, the arrow slits, the towers themselves carry centuries of human emotion, and visitors sense this quietly. History is never loud here. It is layered, patient, and immersive. In addition to its function as a tourist site, the tower also serves a symbolic role in civic and national life. It is a location for ceremonial events, royal celebrations, and public commemorations. These rituals, both large and small, reinforce the tower's role as a living part of London's civic and cultural identity. The tower is a reminder that history is ongoing, and that public memory is maintained not only through stone and mortar, but also through performance, ritual, and care. Modern visitors often comment on the intangible quality of the tower. Walking through its courtyards and corridors, one senses layers of human experience, ambition, fear, creativity, sorrow, and ritual. The tower teaches patience, curiosity, and reflection. It invites slow observation, gentle imagination, and the quiet contemplation of time itself. For this reason, it is as much a site of the mind as a site of historical artifacts. Even today, the tower continues to accumulate stories. Temporary exhibitions highlight aspects of history previously overlooked. Women of the tower, daily life for prisoners, military significance across centuries, and even the culinary history of the site. Each exhibition adds another layer of narrative, quietly deepening visitors' understanding without overwhelming them. It is a living, evolving monument, simultaneously historical and contemporary, factual and legendary. So, as we close Part 9, picture the tower as it stands today, a beacon of history in the heart of London, drawing millions of visitors from across the globe. Its walls, towers, and corridors are alive with centuries of human experience. The yeoman warders maintain centuries-old rituals, the ravens keep watch, and the crown jewels glimmer behind protective glass. Every visitor becomes part of the ongoing story, connecting past and present in a slow, immersive journey through time. The Tower of London has evolved far beyond its origins as a Norman fortress. It is a prison, a palace, a museum, a symbol, a storyteller, and a classroom. It represents continuity, cultural identity, and the quiet, layered accumulation of centuries.
Walking through its spaces is like moving through a slow, endless narrative, one that invites reflection, imagination, and a gentle appreciation for history in all its complexity.
Welcome back, friends. We've meandered through centuries of intrigue, imprisonment, ghosts, legends, ceremonies, and global tourism. Now let's drift gently into the tower's present and future, a place where history continues to breathe and where careful stewardship ensures that centuries of human experience remain alive for generations to come. The Tower of London today is, first and foremost, a site of preservation. Every stone, timber beam, and brick is maintained with meticulous care. Historic royal palaces oversees this work, ensuring that the tower is not only structurally sound, but also authentically representative of its complex past. Restoration is subtle. Walls are cleaned, roofs repaired, and defensive structures stabilized, all without erasing the scars of history that make the tower so compelling. Visitors can trace centuries of change in the very fabric of the building: mortar that has shifted over time, worn staircases, and occasional medieval graffiti, a quiet human trace of lives long gone. Conservation efforts extend beyond the structure itself. The tower's grounds, ravens, ceremonial practices, and exhibitions are carefully managed. Every ritual, from the ceremony of the keys to the feeding of the ravens, continues under supervision, ensuring that traditions survive alongside physical restoration. These rituals are not merely performative, they are living connections to history, reminding visitors that the tower is not a static monument, but a dynamic, ongoing story. Modern challenges, however, require more than stonework and tradition. Urban pollution, climate change, and the sheer number of visitors can threaten delicate structures. Rain, wind, and air pollution all contribute to gradual erosion. Conservation teams monitor these threats continuously, employing both traditional craftsmanship and modern scientific methods to maintain the tower. Sometimes, preservation is invisible. Subtle temperature and humidity controls, protective coverings over sensitive stone, and careful management of foot traffic ensure that centuries of history do not wear away under modern pressures. Technology also plays a role in the tower's ongoing preservation and interpretation. Interactive displays, augmented reality, and digital guides allow visitors to explore hidden aspects of the tower's past, from medieval construction techniques to secret passages and prisoner stories, all without physically altering the historic fabric. These tools help bridge the gap between past and present, making history accessible while respecting the integrity of the site. The tower's role in 21st century London goes beyond preservation. It functions as a cultural ambassador, a symbol of national continuity, and a hub for education. Programs for schools and universities invite students to explore not only the tower's architecture, but also the broader context of British history, monarchy, and urban development. International visitors experience a site that is simultaneously historical and deeply relevant, a living classroom that communicates both fact and legend. Public engagement remains central to the tower's mission. Exhibitions, lectures, and special events provide insights into previously underexplored aspects of tower history, the lives of women who lived or worked there, the daily routines of guards and prisoners, culinary history, and even the environmental context of the tower within London's development. Each initiative deepens the visitor's understanding, encouraging reflection and contemplation rather than sensationalism. Tourism, of course, continues to grow. Millions of visitors each year bring energy, curiosity, and new stories. Their interactions, photographs, notes, reflections, become part of the tower's living narrative. Modern visitors are encouraged to move slowly, to consider the layers of history in the walls, and to appreciate the tower not merely as a site of spectacle, but as a site of memory. This slow engagement, deliberate observation, and reflective approach align perfectly with the tower's centuries-old rhythms. The tower's cultural and symbolic significance also continues to evolve.
It is no longer just a fortress or a prison. It is a symbol of resilience, continuity, and civic identity. National ceremonies, commemorations, and royal events all draw on the tower's historical authority. Yet the tower remains accessible, patient, and quietly dignified, offering a counterpoint to the rapid pace of modern life. Walking its corridors, observing its rituals, or simply sitting in its courtyards allows visitors to slow down, imagine, and reflect on centuries of human activity. Even as London changes around it, skyscrapers, modern bridges, and bustling streets, the tower maintains its timeless presence. It is a constant, a reminder that history endures, even as the city grows and evolves. Visitors from around the world can walk the same paths once trod by medieval kings, prisoners, guards, and artisans, experiencing history in a tactile, immersive way. Looking forward, the tower faces the challenge of balancing modern relevance with historical authenticity. Conservation, visitor engagement, and ceremonial duties must coexist. Every decision, whether it is restoring a tower, updating an exhibition, or training a yeoman warder, is guided by the principle of honoring the tower's long and layered past. Technology, accessibility, and sustainability are incorporated carefully, always with an eye toward preserving the tower's essence for future generations. The tower's future also includes a commitment to storytelling and education. Digital archives, augmented reality tours, and educational programs expand access beyond physical visitors, allowing global audiences to explore the tower's history from afar. These initiatives ensure that the tower continues to fulfill its role as both a repository of history and a center for cultural memory, connecting people with centuries of human experience. Finally, consider the tower as it stands today. A living monument, quietly performing centuries of ritual, preserving centuries of architecture, and narrating centuries of history. Its walls carry the echoes of prisoners, monarchs, guards, artisans, and tourists alike. Its courtyards remain spaces of reflection. Its towers remain watchful, and the ravens continue their silent vigil. In every sense, the tower embodies the slow accumulation of history, patiently inviting each visitor to enter, observe, and imagine. In the 21st century, the Tower of London continues to demonstrate that history is not static. It is active, alive, and immersive. Stone, timber, and tradition combine to create a space where the past is tangible, accessible, and quietly mesmerizing. Walking through its corridors, one is reminded that centuries of human ambition, folly, creativity, and ritual can coexist in a single place, and that the tower, ever patient, will continue to stand, observe, and narrate for centuries to come.
Welcome back, friends. By now, you've walked the tower's grand halls, observed its ceremonial rituals, imagined its ghosts, and reflected on centuries of human activity. But let's slow down even further and drift into the quieter, often overlooked corners, the tiny details, small stories, and hidden lives that make the tower more than stone and legend. Consider the daily life of a minor prisoner. Not Anne Boleyn or Lady Jane Grey, not kings or princes, just ordinary souls caught in extraordinary circumstances. Some were kept in small cells with minimal furnishings, a straw mat, a wooden bucket, a single window slit. They passed time in quiet reflection, scribbling on walls, counting days, or watching the light change through tiny openings. These small gestures, scratching a name, noting a date, are whispers from the past, subtle but profoundly human. Even the tower's staff had rhythms and rituals that rarely make the history books. Guards patrolled endlessly, kitchens prepared meals for hundreds, craftsmen repaired armor or maintained the stone, and clerks recorded mundane details in registers. Each of these lives left an imprint, not dramatic, but cumulative. Over centuries, these small acts became part of the tower's layered story, quietly contributing to the rhythm of history. Food, for instance, was far from glamorous. Prisoners often received bread, gruel, or small portions of meat. Guards had slightly better rations, but their days were long and their work repetitive. Meals were prepared slowly, fires kept burning, and the smells of bread and stew would mingle with the faint tang of damp stone. These everyday details are often overlooked, yet they humanize the tower, reminding us that history is composed not only of dramatic events, but also of daily life. The architecture itself reveals stories to those who look closely. Narrow staircases force slow ascent, arrow slits allow cautious observation, hidden alcoves provide moments of privacy, and worn stone steps bear the weight of countless footsteps. Every curve and indentation is a record of human activity. People ascending stairs, pacing corridors, or tiptoeing past guards in darkness. History is embedded in these details, subtle, quiet, and deeply immersive. The smallest stories often leave the strongest impression. A prisoner's graffiti scratched into the wall, a raven suddenly hopping along the battlements, a guard pausing to glance at a distant sunrise over the Thames, a visitor quietly tracing a hand along centuries-old stone. These moments accumulate, forming a tapestry of lived experience that complements the tower's grand narratives of kings, queens, and executions. The tower in this way teaches patience and observation. Time here feels slow. Life feels layered. Every visitor, every staff member, every bird contributes to an ongoing story that continues quietly, calmly, and patiently. It is a meditation, a space to reflect on human endurance, imagination, and the passage of centuries. Even hidden chambers and minor towers hold subtle stories. Rooms once used for storage might have held secret correspondence. Forgotten stairwells might have been escape routes or places of silent observation. Small gardens tucked behind walls provided herbs for cooking or medicinal purposes. These overlooked details reveal that history is not only found in grand events, but also in quiet utility and human improvisation. As we imagine these quieter moments, picture a prisoner, a guard, or a craftsman moving through the tower. Hear the soft scrape of stone underfoot, the faint creak of timber, the distant caw of a raven. Sense the slow rhythm of centuries accumulating in walls, floors, and courtyards. Every small story, every subtle observation adds to the tower's enduring narrative. And so, Part 12 invites a gentle reflection. The tower is not only dramatic history, legends, or ceremonial pageantry, it is also quiet, patient, and infinitely detailed. Its significance lies not only in grand events, but also in the subtle accumulation of countless minor moments, human lives moving slowly, carefully through stone corridors that outlast them all.
Welcome back, friends. By now, we've wandered through centuries of stone walls, ceremonial rituals, royal ambitions, prisoners' footsteps, and ghostly whispers. In Part 13, let's slow even further and explore the tower's intangible presence, the quiet traces of lives once lived, the lingering echoes of forgotten stories, and the gentle rhythm of time itself. Every corner of the tower holds subtle reminders of the past. Sometimes it is a scratch on the wall, a faint stain in the stone, or the way sunlight filters through a narrow slit, highlighting centuries-old dust. These are the tiny, often overlooked details that give the tower its quiet personality, the things a visitor might sense rather than see directly. Consider the lives of lesser-known prisoners. Not the famous or the infamous, but the ordinary individuals swept into extraordinary circumstances. They paced their cells slowly, marked the passing days, and whispered quietly to one another. Some scratched their names or dates into walls, others left no trace at all. And yet, the tower remembers. Its stone retains subtle traces, a faint resonance of these lives, encouraging visitors to slow down and notice the unspoken stories. The tower's courtyards and corridors are also filled with the rhythms of life past, the echo of footsteps, the distant drip of water, the soft rustle of birds in the turrets. All of these sensory elements create an immersive experience. Time here is not measured in minutes or hours, but in centuries, a slow pulse that invites reflection and contemplation. Even the wind through the battlements seems to carry stories of forgotten moments. There are quiet moments of human creativity and adaptation that rarely make history books. Craftsmen maintained armor, repaired stone, and created intricate keys for heavy doors. Guards developed small routines and personal rituals to pass long hours. Prisoners improvised ways to occupy time, whether through music, poetry, or secret correspondence. These small acts, repeated over generations, contribute to the tower's enduring rhythm. Hidden architectural quirks further enhance this subtle narrative. Narrow spiral staircases force a slow, deliberate ascent, while hidden chambers invite curiosity and imagination. Arrow slits provide both surveillance and quiet observation. Even the wear patterns on stone steps tell stories of countless footsteps, both hurried and hesitant over centuries. These details invite a calm, patient observation, turning every movement through the tower into an experience of layered history. The tower's sounds and silences are equally important. Silence is never absolute. The faintest sounds, a creak, a distant caw, or the whisper of wind, evoke centuries of human presence. In these moments, visitors may feel a connection to the past that is both intimate and meditative. There is a rhythm here, subtle and gentle, which encourages a slow immersion into history. Even minor legends and forgotten anecdotes contribute to this atmosphere. Stories of small escapes, obscure prisoners, minor royal mishaps, or hidden tunnels enrich the narrative not with drama, but with quiet intrigue. These whispers of the past combined with physical presence, stone, timber, and courtyards, to create a space that is both reflective and slightly mysterious. The tower as a sensory experience is perhaps its most powerful quality in modern times. Touching the cold stone walls, feeling the uneven cobbles beneath one's feet, observing the flicker of shadows across narrow stairwells, or hearing the distant toll of a bell, these experiences allow visitors to inhabit history in a way that is calm, immersive, and meditative. The tower teaches patience and quiet attention, reminding us that history is lived slowly, quietly, and in layers. So, as we drift toward the end of this meditation, imagine the tower one more time. Its walls holding centuries of whispers, corridors echoing footsteps, courtyards basking in sunlight or shadow, and ravens observing silently from their perches. Here, history is slow, patient, and quietly persistent, a perfect environment for reflection, imagination, and gentle contemplation. The Tower of London, in all its stone, timber, legend, and ritual, continues to endure. It invites us not only to learn, but also to feel, to pause, and to let centuries of human experience wash over us slowly like a calm, unending tide.